Hello and good morning, everyone. I think we've still got a few people dropping in. I can see the participants list growing, so we'll just give that maybe 30 seconds or so and see where we end up. But I don't want to keep anybody hanging on longer than we need to. Literally flying in as we speak. If anyone wants to just put a note in the... Oh, thanks, Hannah. I can see your note, so it is working. People can hear me. That's great. That's really important. I might just actually, from a tech perspective, one thing to say is we've had a little bit of trouble with the resolution quality for broadcast. This will be recorded, so you'll get a high-res version, but if any of the imagery looks a little bit blurry, apologies for that. It might be okay. We've gone to Zoom to see if they can sort it. It's whether they sort it in time. So I think we should just crack on. Hello and a very warm welcome to everybody. We've been excited by the number of people who've registered for this. Lots of names that we recognise, which is great. So thank you for attending, and lots that we don't, which is really exciting as well. And we do appreciate everybody taking half an hour, 45 minutes out of their busy mornings today to listen in. So you'll have seen from the blurb that accompanies this webinar, B2B More Human, that what we're going to be looking at today is looking into what it is that makes the highest performers in B2B consistently outperform the others. And armed with that, hopefully give you something to help you and up your own B2B brand building game. So the thinking and the ideas that I'm going to share today are born of working with, I'm not even going to guess at how many, countless B2B organisations over the best part of 30 years now, which is quite scary. And it might be a bit of a tall order, but we're going to try and condense that, distill that, if you like, into these next 30 minutes, the kind of key points. So based on what we've witnessed in terms of what separates the very best in B2B from the rest, that will be the focus of this webinar. There will be, it's worth saying that I've left a bit of time at the end for Q&A. If you want to, the Q&A feature should work. So if at any point you think, I've got a question I'd like to ask, pop that into the Q&A and I will do my best to answer as many of those with the time that we have at the end. If we don't get through all of them, myself or one of the team will make sure that we do answer that question in one way or another. And I think that is probably everything by way of an intro. Except to say this really will be a whistle-stop tour, 30 years into 30 minutes, as I say, but hopefully plenty in here that you'll find of value. So let me crack on. I think it's worth starting with the challenge that every brand faces, not just B2B. And this is a simplification that we like because it does really distill it down to the kind of nuts and bolts of the problem. So every brand ultimately is looking to be the brand of choice in their particular market, their particular field, amongst their particular audience. So how do you get to that point of being preferred? Well, there are really two key things at play. The first of which, here we go, is that you need to be in some way, you need to have something that matters to your audience. You need to be meaningfully different. And that difference doesn't have to be functional. It can be emotional, but something that sets you apart from the alternatives in a relative way. So it's about relative difference. Now, that's great because if you've got that relative difference, if you're meaningfully different in a way that's compelling to your audience, then the chances are that you are going to be the brand of choice. But unfortunately, that doesn't count for a great deal if you don't actually come to mind in the first place. And that's why it's really, really important that you are also memorable. Now, being memorable or brand salience, coming to mind at the point of purchase, is, as I say, important to any brand. But that challenge is compounded in the world of B2B. And I suspect lots of you will be familiar with the 95-5 rule. It's talked quite a lot about on the B2B Institute, on LinkedIn, etc. But effectively what it amounts to is this idea that in the world of B2B, around about 95%, the vast majority of your potential buyers aren't actually ready to buy at any given moment in time. So only 5% are actually buying from you, and you've got this massive audience who might buy for you sometime in the future. But if they don't know about you and that you're not coming to mind at that point when they do want to buy, then you're not even going to get in the mix. So the key thing about B2B More Human is that what we've witnessed from working with all these B2B brands over so many years is that by leaning into being more human, and we'll explain obviously more about what that means, you can both up your game in terms of being memorable and also meaningfully different. The first point that's worth making is amongst all the B2B brands that we've worked over the years, that the really successful ones rarely think in terms of B2B or business to business. I don't think it's an acronym that really resonates with them, because they know ultimately it never is one business talking to another business. It's always another human talking to another human. It's people to people. The other thing that they recognize and they embrace is that, since we first rose up on two feet, or our ancestors did, our brains have changed very, very little. Human nature has changed very little over all the time that we've been in existence. And yet we live in a world that's changing frighteningly quickly. So around us, everything's happening at pace. Technology is advancing at speeds, increasing exponential speeds, and yet we're fundamentally the same human beings we've always been. And with that come a whole bunch of quirks. We're not particularly rational, we're contradictory, we've got positive things, less positive things. We just are what we are. We're human, we're not perfect. And recognizing that is really the kind of central premise to B2B More Human. And it also underpins 4 principles that we've identified that are common characteristics and behaviours that we've seen in the very best of B2B. And what I'm going to do now is walk you through each of those principles, taking those in turn. So, principle number 1, people before product. Now, this in the world of marketing full stop is kind of crucial. It's just highlighted in B2B. What we see typically, and I don't mean to be kind of unfair with this, but it is common territory. We see a lot of brands behaving as experts, but what they're really experts in is talking about themselves. And they have products, services that may well be really fantastic, and that's absolutely valid, but they're talking to their audiences, engaging with their audiences in a way that's really about the what and the how and the functional side of what they do, and missing out on tapping in at a more emotional level. And we have an example that we often refer to, because this is a client we worked with a few years ago, and when we started working with them, they talked about themselves in this way. And I won't read it, but you can see if you scan over it, it's a very functional way of talking. Effectively what Preservica does, they have a very clever platform which enables any file, this PDF for example, to retain its integrity over many years. So as file formats change, as file types format, businesses or institutions can be confident that their digital assets retain their integrity and can be accessed at any point in the future. So it's all great. By the time we finished working with them, they were talking about themselves in a very different way. They elevated the way they were talking to, and as you can see here, started to frame it as something very different. The world's cultural, economic, social and political memory is at risk. Our mission is to protect it. And the really interesting thing about this was the impact that it had immediately and also over the long term. So straight away, the team were energized with a greater sense of what they were all about, the mission they were on. Preservica found that the number of applicants was going up, the caliber of those applicants was also going up. And perhaps the main thing that they were looking to do, they were looking to break into new markets. Historically, they'd been very much involved in memory institutions, so galleries, archives, museums, etc. Could see all the potential in the corporate world, and a positioning like this that elevated and set them apart from their competitors proved instrumental in being able to break into those new markets. Something again that I suspect a number of you might be familiar with, but I wanted to include it here because it's a really useful tool. In fact, if any of you have taken part in any of Mark Ritson's mini MBAs, you'll probably have seen it there. If not, I'm sure you'll have seen it somewhere else. It's called the Benefit Ladder, and it's a really helpful device for trying to find meaningful difference. And I thought I could illustrate that quite nicely with that Preservica example. So if you take Preservica, their product, it's digital preservation software. You hop up a level to features. This isn't an exhaustive list. There are loads of features, but here are some of those. They're all great. But what actually is the benefit of all of those? So we step up a level again. The benefit of those features is that the integrity of your file is protected, it's kept alive, and it's accessible in the future. Taking it up a further level as we move effectively from sort of commodity to more of a brand. The customer benefit here is that you have the confidence that you can access those files. However old they are, you will be able to access them in the future. And then jumping right to the top, as we saw on the previous slide, there's a very kind of powerful emotional statement here about global memory and Preservica's role in protecting that. So if you've not tried this with your own brand, I definitely recommend it. I mean, most people hop up the first couple of steps and then find it gets increasingly more difficult, as you'd expect. But the goal really is to find a point at which you have meaningful difference from your competitors, and you're in a position, that it's compelling, it's differentiated, and you can live up to it. Of course, it needs to be authentic, and that doesn't mean going necessarily right to the top of the ladder, but somewhere above product features and product benefits is probably where you want to land if you want to have any chance of meaningful difference and finding a way to be remembered by your B2B customers when in fact they are ready to buy. So that was principle number one, people before product. Principle number two, we call keep it real. And there's tons under this. In fact, within each of these principles, there is a lot to unpack. Keep it real at a macro level. It's about authenticity, it's about imperfection, it's about empathy, the power of all of those things. On a day-to-day level, this could just be about talking in a way that's jargon-free, plain English, a bit more human. But let's have a look at a couple of those elements. I did want to use a picture here of Jennifer Lawrence, 2013, falling on the stairs, going to collect her Best Actress award, but licensing issues made that a bit of a concern. So if you can imagine, this is Hollywood actress Jennifer Lawrence, that would be great. But I wanted to use this to illustrate something called the pratfall effect. Again, some of you are possibly familiar with it. Worth Googling after this webinar to get some more information. But effectively what happened when Jennifer Lawrence fell over and then subsequently gave her acceptance speech and openly acknowledged it, made a bit of a joke of it, somebody who was already very credible, somebody who was already very popular, that positive sentiment increased further. She became effectively more relatable and as a result more likable, and when you're more likable, you're typically more memorable. So there's something B2B can learn from this. There was another experiment, which I think is quite nice because it doesn't actually involve people other than the participants in the experiment. But this was an experiment run by Zenith Optomedia, and they asked about 450 people to look at this image and simply say which cookie they preferred. It would be quite interesting to do it now. If you've got access to the chat, put in an L or put in an R, and we'll see how close at the end, perhaps if we have time, we are to the original study. Wow, they're flying in now. I can see that. I think this is going to be more convincing than the actual study itself. But here were the results of the original study. 2/3 preferring the rougher edged, crumblier, potentially more appetizing looking cookie. So what does all this mean for B2B? Well, I think it feeds into a pervading misconception. We hear this a lot when we work with clients, particularly in professional services, financial services, those sorts of B2B arenas. It is often very difficult for people to see past this idea that in order to be seen as credible, in order to be seen as professional and worthy of engaging with, we have to have this level of slickness, this level of polish and perfection. The reality, as demonstrated by the pratfall effect, is that we don't. I mean, it is important to recognise that being a shambles is no good. There is a degree of credibility needs to exist at the outset to be enhanced by demonstrating some sort of vulnerability or imperfection. So this is the misconception. The reality, I've moved positions. The reality is really quite different. One of the goals here, as I say, is to be memorable, because we need to come to mind as and when our customers are ready to buy. And by leaning into what makes us human, just a few of these things, that authenticity, the imperfections, the vulnerability, or at least not being afraid to exhibit those, to show those, can work it very much in the brand's favour, demonstrating a relatability, leading to likability, leading to memorability. So we're thinking about what would illustrate at least some of these points quite well, and we picked a piece of positioning work and campaign work that we did for the lender, mortgage lender, Pepper Money. I think there might be a couple of people. I saw Rob's name pop up. So hello, anyone from Pepper here today. When we first started working with Pepper, we thought it would be worth having a closer look at how this market, the market effectively, if you're a borrower and you're unable to get a mortgage through the high street because perhaps, like most people, there's some sort of blemish on your credit history, then Pepper could be a very good alternative for you. The interesting thing was that the language used around the sector was generally quite negative, unconventional, difficult, non-conforming. So negative in itself and fairly disparaging to the borrowers who might need to turn to a lender like Pepper in order to find a mortgage. But one or two brokers, one or two intermediaries, whilst using these terms, would also say, well, the thing about these cases, I find them really interesting. And in there, we saw an opportunity to embrace a slightly different way, or a very different way, of describing a sector. And we took that idea, this idea of interesting, and we flowed it through all the material that Pepper were utilising at that point, all the communications activity, all the marketing activity. And very quickly, Pepper became associated with interesting cases. So we were showing empathy to our end audience, the borrowers, but we were also kind of showing that we were more in touch. It was a really good demonstration of, hold on a minute, how do we keep this real? And when we kept it real, it had this cut through. And the proof was in the numbers. Lending volumes were up, broker registrations were up, but there was very much this association with Pepper. So a nice example, I think, there of how keeping it real can make a real difference to a B2B focused brand. The third principle of B2B more human is head and heart. So when we're talking about head, we're talking in these sorts of terms. So it's activity, marketing, communications that has more of a short-term focus. It's typically more rational. For some of the brands that we've been talking about earlier, this might be about talking about specific products, rate changes, features, criteria, but it could be anything that's more feature-driven, typically a more focused reach. There's a degree of often interaction required. There's a call to action, download, view the demo, download the guide, call us, email us, whatever it might be. And it's focused on immediate sales. The flip side of that is heart, and heart speaks to a longer term play. Much more emotional, less focused, less of a specific desire for a call to action, designed to be memorable, designed to elevate above the rational. And really it's about assuring future sales. So versus we need to make some sales now, it's about future sales. And all this, I'm going to go back one. The issue with B2B, as hopefully this slide demonstrates, is that the weighting is all wrong. So the best in B2B understand that both of these things are really important. They're really important. But typically in B2B, we see a massive overemphasis on the head-related activity and very little, if any, on the heart side of things. And what we're looking for is a much more even balance. And again, as budding marketers, I'm sure you're familiar with the great work of Binet and Field. They talk about the long and the short of it, and this is a kind of diagram adapted from all the work that they've done that has shown that in order to increase sales, in order to increase growth, in order to develop your brand, it's not enough to simply focus on the short-term rational activity. You get these peaks and troughs as you'd expect, but if you're looking to grow sustainably, then you need to balance that really effectively with what we're calling this the heart-based activity. And in the context of your campaigning, just to kind of develop on that visual, it's about finding a way, finding a campaign, finding a message, a brand level message that you can be perpetuating consistently, whether it's weaved into some of the tactical activity or it's a separate piece of activity. It's always on, it's always happening. You're trying to create you're trying to be recognized for a particular set of attributes, for be recognized for being a particular thing. And the example that we thought could be nice here is some work that we've recently done with Coventry Building Society, specifically with Coventry for intermediaries. And again, if there's anyone here from Coventry today, hello to you. Thanks for joining. None of this will be new to you, but I think hopefully you'll be able to sit in the context of some of this thinking. So Coventry, again, an intermediary lender, decided that they needed to look at a brand building campaign. Like most lenders, they do all the tactical stuff they should be doing, communicating products, product changes, rates, criteria, all of those things, which are super important. Brokers want that. That's really important to them, but it does result in the peaks and troughs, and actually how in a marginal market can we create some relative differentiation over the long term. And the nuts and bolts of their campaign, the brief, if you like, there was a piece of insight, a recognition that most mortgage brokers feel like finding a lender that puts them genuinely first is really difficult. Coventry felt they definitely did do this, and they ought to be communicating about that. And that led to this proposition of certainty. So whether you want to speak to a human on the other end of the phone, you can be certain of that. Whether you'll be kept updated with the progress of your case for your client, you can be certain of that. Whatever it might be, transparency, a decision one way or the other, whatever that decision is, you can be certain of it. And we took that theme and we developed it. We built on their incredible existing visual identity that uses these cut out human-made illustrations and sculptures to tell this story of certainty. So it's early days, but it's giving Coventry something to talk about that is of genuine value to brokers and matters to brokers beyond the day-to-day. And you probably can't see it in there. There's a few details, but what's interesting about this campaign as well is it's already had an impact on that short-term activity. And that's the beauty of balancing the head and the heart, the long and the short. The final principle of B2B, more human, dare to be different. So I think it's fair to say, there's a saying, birds of a feather flock together, and within business, within branding, there is definitely a tendency to stick with what feels comfortable and what feels conventional. The danger, of course, with that is something we call blanding. You end up just blending in a way that means you don't stand out at all. So what we've seen from the best in B2B is that they're able to kind of pull themselves out of that comfort zone and take that step in a way that's effective. This, I love. It's been doing the rounds on LinkedIn. You've possibly seen it already, but I wonder who you might think was the most talked about band at this death metal festival last year. I think this is just a brilliant example of category codes. So within what could be described as a very niche space, there's clearly a look and feel that's consistent to belonging to part of this, that Party Cannon have chosen to buck and to great effect too. So that is B2C, of course. But B2B, what we need to remember, again, going back to that 95-5 rule, is that we need to work even harder on this creativity side of things. And not only do we need to work harder, we need to recognise that because the bar is relatively low, there's a huge opportunity in doing so too. So what do we have at our disposal to be braver, as it were, to dare to be different? Well, I suspect many of you don't need convincing, but the evidence supporting the effectiveness or the impact of creativity on advertising effectiveness, on brand growth is kind of abundant and indisputable. It's overwhelming when you go looking for it, and yet still, for the most part, we see in B2B brands just a little bit nervous about doing anything that might sit them outside of what is expected. Here's a little example. You could probably guess what sector Brook Street de Roche operated in and still do, or they've subsequently been acquired. They are lawyers, commercial property lawyers. And when we started working with them, we spent a bit of time just trying to get under the skin of what it was that they felt they stood for, what it was that made them different, and what they wanted to bring to life through their brand identity, both from a verbal identity perspective and a visual identity perspective. And we got down to this kind of neat set of attributes. There was a bit of information under each of these, but effectively they wanted to communicate an idea of less is more. If you worked with them, you wouldn't be passed around multiple people and your costs inflating. You would have a very core team and they would stick closely with you. It was a direct and personal approach. They had a confidence that was quietly so, and a real focus on building relationships. So we developed an identity which kind of changed them quite dramatically and looked to bring to life these particular elements. At the heart of it was quite a simple logo at face value. It looks like, okay, that's nice, but we were keen to take it a step on. And what we actually did was develop effectively a mark that could be adapted to literally say anything. As long as it was a 4-word quatrain, it could say something. So very quickly they were able to communicate messages and give a sense of what the organisation was about simply through this mark. And it's fair to say they had a ton of fun with it as well. There were, as we got towards the end of the process, a lot of emails were going back and forth with just 4 words. So that's always a good sign that something's been embraced internally. And the proof was in the pudding here. A couple of years later, they sold to a much bigger firm. And in part, they were able to stand out. That was down to being able to stand out and being memorable. So there are the 4 principles. As I say, a little bit of a whistle-stop tour. We've got people before product, we've got keep it real, we've got head and heart, and we've got dare to be different. And it may be that as I've been going through this, you're possibly thinking a little bit about your own brand and thinking where are we performing fairly well here? Perhaps where are we falling short? And that's great. I think that's really important. And we thought it would be a nice way to finish, just to kind of share with you a possible roadmap that you could implement in order to kind of take this on further if you wish to. So, where to start? Very fair question. This is all well and good, but what do I do next? So, as with so many things, when you're looking to progress, you have to understand where you are now. What is the baseline? So, evaluating where you are needn't be a massive chore. And actually, what we've done, we have a guide, a PDF guide. So everybody who's registered will ping this out automatically, or a link to it for you to download. That guide's kind of got two parts to it. It's got a kind of front end, which covers some of the stuff I've talked about today. But the back part of it is something we call the B2B More Human Health Check. And it's a very simple way to assess yourself, probably, or your brand rather, probably within an hour you could do it. There are a number of questions relating to each of the 4 principles. You score them 1 to 9. Total up score. It's all very simple, and you plot it on a spider diagram. And what it does, it just gives you a very easy visual snapshot to see where you're performing pretty well and where perhaps less so. And from that point, you're then in a position to go, okay, we understand that we're not perhaps performing here as well as we'd like to. We're a bit weak on the head and heart, getting that balance right. We could definitely be more different, dare to be a bit more different. But it's trying to understand, and perhaps you need to get together with the right people within your organisation to understand what the root cause is. Could be any number of things. It might be something might be down to your positioning. There isn't a degree of clarity and focus that enables you to really talk to the problems that you solve for your customers, the value that you add, and that's why you're getting stuck in the world of product features and facts. It could be a culture, a legacy of short-termism. We're on a sales cycle. We never kind of think beyond that. We're thinking about sales today, not sales a year, 2-3 years from now. Or it might be just simply about understanding the value of creativity. So getting your heads around what the problem is, that's your second step, that diagnostic piece. From there, you can think, okay, let's develop a strategy. How are we actually going to tackle this? That needs to start with objectives, because you will probably find that there are plenty of quick wins that you can lean into. For example, you might just find that going onto the homepage of your website with a bit of copy work, you can switch things around. So actually, you're making your customer the hero of the story rather than talking about how great your brand is. Sometimes that's as easy as swapping wherever you're talking about we, you try and find a way to talk about you. So there'll be quick wins, but there'll be bigger things that you're not going to be able to change overnight, and might go back to having to look at your positioning and how you're articulating that positioning. So part of that might mean looking at your own resources, internal capabilities, and it might mean looking outside for specialist support, which of course we can help with if you are interested. And once you've got that, of course, it's like get it into a plan, put some specific timelines against it, make sure everybody knows what they're doing, what you're trying to achieve. And I would say actually about this, we are human, pun intended, so be realistic. I know for one that I tend to overestimate what I can achieve in any given time frame. So be realistic about it, because this is a long-term play. So the more robust you can be about it, the better it is going to be over the long term. And that, I think at about 33 minutes, is slightly over, brings us to the end of the actual presentation bit. I hope there were things of value in there that got the grey matter working, some food for thought. I did say, we've got a few minutes now. If anybody has any questions, any thoughts, anything they'd like to share, if you could pop it into the Q&A section, that's probably the best thing. I've got one question here. Couple of questions. This is definitely a common theme. How this is all well and good. How do we get a board, a senior management to invest in brand building? And that is a super common challenge. We're seeing it increasingly, actually, and we spend quite a bit of time with prospects, helping them shape a business case for the purse holders within their organisation, if that isn't them. And I think typically I would look to point them to the work of Binet and Field. That's a really good start, because when you start talking in terms of the value of brand building, you're trying to create and capture value beyond the balance sheet. That starts to resonate when you can start talking in more commercial terms, when you talk about assuring future sales, when you talk about being able to reduce price sensitivity, because most of you are probably working in markets where price is a real factor. So the more meaningfully different you can be, the more you can play to a premium price. So they're all worth looking at. The other thing is probably pointing them towards that 95/5 rule as part of that whole conversation, and perhaps getting away. We often find that once they realise that it's less about immediate ROI and maybe buy into the idea of COI, cost of inaction, then it starts to resonate and become more appealing. Any other question? Oh, here's one. Okay, we often make the pitch list. We tend to have a very good conversion rate, but we're not getting onto that list as much as we like. How do we change that? So, yeah, if you remember the preference to be preferred, you need to be meaningfully different, but you also need to be memorable. You know, if you're not in the race to begin with, then you're never going to win it. So it sounds, well, first of all, I don't know what industry you're in, that question, but congratulations that you are converting well and winning most of your pitches, I'm assuming, or tenders. If the challenge is being considered in the first place, then that really speaks to what you are doing around your brand building activity and what are you doing beyond the targeted outreach. So lean into the dare to be different, lean into the heart elements, take a good look at how well defined your story is and how well you are articulating that story. Oh, Hannah, there's a good one. Hannah Poulton, which brands do you think are nailing this, other than the examples you've already worked on? Oh, right, that's a good. I should have prepped. Appreciate it. Don't always see much B2B marketing unless we're in the top. How many big names can you highlight? Sage do this really well. The accountancy software, you might have seen their campaign. I think I first spotted it on the tube station. Big posters, very striking illustrative style. The copy spoke to the very real problems that accountants face and what they were trying to, within organisations, face. And what I read into a little bit of the background of that campaign, and they took an approach which would really speaks to what we've been talking about today. They interviewed accountants within various sizes of firms. What are the things that really keep them up at night? And it was less, again, about the technical bit. It was about missing deadlines. It was about being perceived as not adding sufficient weight to the process, whatever it was. I can't remember exactly the sort of things, but what they did was take those very real moments and bring them to life in a testimonial in a testimonial-driven approach, which isn't particularly original, but by taking real people and creating almost avatars, illustrations of them, they were able to kind of tap into that distinctiveness piece whilst also being meaningfully different. So I think they did really well, and certainly from the case studies, because I'm not close to the actual figures around that project, it proved really effective. This is where I need somebody else looking at questions. Somebody's actually suggested another good example. the B2B side of Hiscox, the insurance, really good. If you Google that, they did an outdoor campaign which was all about mistakes, because you're trying to cover yourself. It's indemnity. They took out a whole billboard, but the actual poster only sat within the side of it, or part of it was coming off, or something had fallen over. I mean, they've always been very good at this on the B2C side, but they're clearly looking at how can we speak to businesses again in a really good way. And I suppose the other one that we didn't include in here because it's cited so often, but I think is brilliant, is the epic split from Volvo. If you've not, again, Google that, epic split Volvo. If you've not seen it, if you imagine the brief was, we've got these incredible Volvo trucks and we want to tell our prospects how amazing and accurate the steering is, the precision steering. So that could have been a whole load of numbers, and it could have been some demonstrations, but instead they chose to stick Jean-Claude Van Damme. It starts with him. Enya is playing, that's the music, and you're not sure what's quite going on, but as it pans away, you see that Jean-Claude Van Damme is doing the splits on these two, 20-ton lorries, which is incredible. And if you just look at how many times that's been shared, and how many people are familiar with that, is a fantastic example. Any other questions? I think we are there with the questions. So look, you get 4 minutes back, everybody. I hope you found that of value and enjoyed it. If you do have any questions, if you go away and think, we should ask that, just Ali at mark-making.com, ping me an email, or anyone at Mark Making, and we'll certainly get back to you. And as I said, we'll be sharing not only the PDF, the guide to B2B More Human. We'll also be sharing this recording. So for those of you who are watching it on recording and not live, again, thanks for joining. And for those of you who are here today, thank you very much for joining. You've been a great audience. Thank you.